You can manually split, of course. If you know that a chunk is too large, if you know that you've written a lot of data to a particular chunk and the MongoS just hasn't picked up on it, you can actually use a couple of commands. So they are split find and split at. Now, the most commonly used one is split find. So what split find will do is you'll pass in a query that will match a particular chunk. Right, so in our case, and what we're about to do in an example, it would be an object ID because we sharded on the _ID key back in our previous example. You give it an object ID that will match a particular chunk. You pass that in, and what it will do is it will just split that chunk in two. That's all split find does. We'll just do that over and over and over again. Every time you pass it in a valid object ID or valid shard key, it will find that chunk and split it into two. Split at is a bit more of a precision instrument. This is where you would actually pass in a specific split point. This is what you'll use when you're doing some pre-splitting and things like that. So I'm going to leave the implementation of split at until we're doing a full pre-splitting example, and that'll be in a later module. But let's have a quick look at split find. So going back to our old MongoS here, I have actually started this MongoS with auto splitting turned off. If you want to turn auto splitting off, you may do so by starting MongoS with the -- no auto split option. And I've done that so that I could create some large chunks for us to actually split out. So here's our sh.status, here's our shard test.foo. This is the collection that we sharded some time ago. What I've been doing is playing with these later chunk ranges here. The maximum keys are somewhat off the screen here, but you only need one value to actually match them, so these will do just fine. So we can match these chunks based here. So we now have 7 chunks. They're spread across the 2 shards. So you can see they're on RS0, RS0, RS1, RS1, RS1. There we go. And the max chunk is on RS1. The min chunk is on RS0. So there we go. There's our chunks. The other thing I've done is I've written a little JavaScript here. And what the JavaScript does is it iterates through all of these chunk ranges and prints out some information about them. And the 2 things that it's actually going to print out that are of interest to us at least are the number of documents in the chunk and the chunk size. So let's have a quick look at that. We'll be making this all chunk info script available to you as part of the course, so you just run it by running all chunk info and passing in the namespace that you want to see. It's very, very simple. It just iterates through the namespace, goes through, finds each chunk, checks to see what's in each one of them, and prints out a little bit of information about them. And what it does is the chunk ID, the shard that it lives on, the chunk size, which is this column here, and that's in bytes, and the objects in the chunk, or the number of documents in the chunk, and that's this final number here. So I've been doing a little bit of work here already. I've already done a bit of splitting here and a bit more inserting. So the max chunk, which is where all of our inserts are going to go, remember, because we have sharded on object ID. This has about 200,000 documents in it. I've run through our for loop twice. These 2 chunks here, I did several rounds of inserts and I've already split them just to make sure everything was working. So let's split this one here again. Now, as I mentioned to you, in order to run the split find command, you need to have a valid object in there that will actually work as part of the query. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to use the output from my script to do this. I'm just going to copy and paste it in there. So I've taken this value here, object ID. I know that this is in the chunk itself because it's one of the boundaries of the chunk. So if I do a split find, this will match that chunk. I'm going to say please split that. It's in shardtest.foo, and here's the query I'd like you to match on to find the particular chunk. So let's do that. Get an OK one back, and let's see what effect that has had on our chunks. You can see here's the original one. It used to have this 110,368. It used to be identical to this chunk here because that was one of the ones that was split into previously. Now it has 55,184 split right down the middle, and it is half the size. So that's how you do a manual split into using split find. And in fact, we can actually repeat that process because you'll notice that the value we use to find is now the lower bound of this other chunk here. So let's just run it again. And there we go. So let's run our little function, find out how things look now. And there you go. So the one that used to be 55,184, this sort of twin of this chunk here, has now been split. There's 27,592 in there, and the size is halved. So there you go. That's how you do a split find.